podcasting from a remote location somewhere deep in the heart of New York City. This is Crypto Characters, and I'm your host, Jason Nagy. Our guest for today is Daniel Dewar, CEO and co-founder of Paperchain, which is building a faster payments model for media industry. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jason. Happy to be here.
All right, so let's talk about Paperchain.
I mean, for me, this is almost a 3-year-old business now. Very first iteration was 2016, if you can believe it.
So let's start with this. That's a long time.
Yeah.
So tell me what brought Paperchain to where it is today, and what gave you the idea for working on payments, blockchain, and media?
I mean, like with anything, it goes back a lot further than that. I originally was a sound engineer working in music and then in film and TV. That was 2009 through to 2012. I actually initially moved to New York City in 2012, and I wanted to work in film and TV, and I worked on a couple of independent projects. While I was here is when I met Dave Tomaselli, one of my co-founders, initially through my roommate. I eventually had to go back to Australia in 2013 because I couldn't get my visa renewed, so I was kicked out of the country.
We don't like Australians in America.
Yeah, apparently not. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Our office now is in the Lower East Side, and there's a lot of Australians down there.
Yeah, there's a great bar actually in the East Village? It's maybe like by Elizabeth Street, where the church is. There's a great Australian bar there. They have great. I think it's Cooper's beer on tap or something like that.
Oh yeah. There's a couple of bars around. They have some local Australian ones.
Yeah, I thought that was.
Got to check it out.
It's a great bar. If you haven't been there, you should go.
I will. Yeah. But when I moved back to Australia, I moved into data and analytics and working at a company called Datalicious, and we were doing like attribution modeling and conversion modeling for advertisers and brands. And it shocked me at how advanced advertisers and brands were about what they did with data and how they did their ROI modeling and things like that.
Okay.
And knowing just in the music industry, that just didn't exist.
Well, how'd you know about that in the music industry?
Well, when you're working in studios, you're liaising with record labels, you're liaising with artists and publishers, and you just know that there's so many gaps in the way data is captured, the way data is stored, the way it's analyzed, the way sales is captured, and there's always just unpaid royalties or misattribution and things like that. So you just know that it's a mess. So
it's funny, when I think of studio, I think of like tech-focused people that really understand sound, they're really musicians effectively. That I don't think of tech folks in the music industry as having to encounter all that, but I guess you do from royalties, right?
Yeah.
Production royalties?
It's just part of that. So when you're in studio, I mean, yes, you're someone who doesn't see sunlight very much, and you spend 18 hours a day, and you get in and it's dark, and you leave and it's dark. There's that element to it too, but you're also managing artists, and you're working with a label or a manager, and usually if they're using session musicians, everyone has to report what they worked on, how many hours and things like that. If there was any contribution around songwriting credits, like all of that has to get reported. And even though you don't do it as a sound engineer, you're there witnessing all of those reports being developed.
Gotcha. All right. Okay, so sound engineer, music business is a total mess.
Yes.
And you go to advertising, and it's true because I know some folks that worked in advertising for internet companies, and they have a ton of actual data about everything you do. Yeah.
So the company I worked for, I mean, we were building lookalike models for, if you're advertising to this postcode, who lives in that postcode, what sort of brands do they have affinity for? So if you're, say, Lexus, the idea is that you don't want to waste your advertising dollars advertising this postcode because they have a brand affinity for another car manufacturer, for example.
That's pretty cool. They knew that?
Yeah. And so we were ultimately acquired by the credit bureau in Australia, which was Vita at the time, which ended up being acquired by Equifax.
Okay.
And so you start to build those reports in terms of how you could use that data again. It's like if you're in this postcode and you're Lexus, but people generally have a bad credit score, then you probably don't want to spend your advertising dollars there. So they were just very smart in how, you could get into the ethics of how, that, but at the end of the day, they're just very smart in how they're using their advertising spend and how they're using data to inform that.
Well, as a lawyer, I don't believe in ethics anyway, so we're totally fine.
But even, wider things just fascinate me on building ROI models. So what we would do with clients is We would track all of their media spend, digital media spend, and offline media spends, and tell them, okay, if you were to shift your marketing budget into these channels, this is how many sales you can expect to generate. And again, just looking back on the music industry, that just didn't happen, and that still doesn't happen. There's no one sits there and says, okay, we have a new release going out, we're going to spend $400,000 on radio, and we're going to make back, for every dollar we spend, we're going to make back, you know, $1.16 or something like that. It just doesn't exist. It's like radio gets a $400K budget, and that's it.
Right, yeah, someone
money
decided.
sunk. Yeah, money sunk, and that's it. You still have labels, even major labels, in their summer internships. They get their interns into a room together, and all their job is to sit there and dial radio stations and request catalog from that label.
Really?
And yeah,
so weird.
Yeah, and that's, you know, that's stuff that happens like last year.
That's like a broker. Like you know, we would get the cold calls from brokers. Hey, you got stock you want to buy? Hey, Jason, how you doing? Some guy I've never heard of before who's pretending to be my friend.
Yeah.
Great way to sell, right?
I mean, it must work. I mean, you know, to some degree. I'm not sure, but
it's a broken model, I think.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And so that's just what fascinated me about it, was that it just didn't exist. When I first met Dave in 2012, his previous business was a royalty accounting platform for record labels. So in the 90s, he launched his own label, and he built his own back-end software to manage sales ingestion and royalty accounting.
He launched his own label?
Yeah.
And that's pretty cool.
Stature Records, a dance label, yeah.
A dance label, huh?
Yeah.
All right, that's his Brooklyn coming out. There's a lot of dancing.
Oh, for sure,
right?
yeah. And you got to talk to him. He's got a lot of great stories about that. I mean, he went around the world with DJs and had a wild time.
Really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So he built that software in the mid-2000s. He actually launched it as a separate product and started selling it to other record labels. And at the onset of digital, when iTunes first started coming out, so in like 2004, 2005, he built this platform that ingested all of the sales data from iTunes and then did end-run royalty and statement reporting for these record labels.
Really? So he's a tech guy as well.
Yeah. He likes to say that he subsidized his music business with by an IT and tech career. Yeah. It's
funny, you know, I saw you guys actually almost flipped. Obviously, we know each other, right? You and I ran into each other on a panel.
Yes.
A couple of years ago. So I always saw you as the tech person and Dave as the music person, but you're really both the same. I mean, you both have this dual aspects to your expertise, which is a pretty good partnership.
Yeah, I think we complement each other well. I just generally think that I know enough to get myself into trouble across a number of areas, but not enough to truly own each one.
Right.
But for what we're doing, and I guess my role within the business, that helps as well. And then when I first met him, he was leaving that previous business. And the challenge for all of his clients was always around liquidity and how fast they were getting paid. It's like, yes, we're getting paid, but we're getting paid in 90 days or 6 months. So we first started talking in 2012 about this idea on using data to create like a micro factoring model. How can you use this sales data to then leverage that as some sort of asset to advance against? And, there was the data wasn't really readily available. The financing piece in terms of how that would work, we didn't really have all those pieces together. I guess then years later, cut to mid-2016, I guess 2015, start reading about Ethereum, get interested in this idea of putting tangible assets and representing them digitally. Started looking at, and the first iteration of Paperchain was a prototype for how you could validate metadata between different nodes in a network. So the use case being that, okay, you have Spotify running a node on, say, Ethereum, you have a record label, you have a performing rights society. How do you know that they all have the same data? And how do you make calls or validate that information within the network? And that was the initial prototype.
So let's dig into that. I kind of want to understand it. So the very basic idea for Paperchain was, we're talking 2015, right?
This is now getting like June 2016, yeah.
All right. And so you look at Ethereum and the smart contract applications on Ethereum. That's essentially what you guys not stumbled into, but found, right?
Yeah.
And you essentially see that as now were you envisioning the blockchain as being the single source of truth for all of these entities? Is that kind of how you saw it?
Yeah, exactly. So it was really just leveraging the validation components of like the consensus mechanism to validate metadata. So if you go, and the prototype was simply a web application where it had a song. There were a couple of other nodes in the local network. on one of the songs, they all had the same data. So when you hit play, it made an API call into the chain, and that validated and built consensus between all the nodes. Is like, is this information correct? Or if it was incorrect, then it would reject the play of a song, for example.
I mean, so, in other words, I would want to play a song, and you'd have to have all the validations correct for me to play the song?
Yeah.
So it was personal to, it was on an individual basis, not like on a Spotify basis.
Yeah, it was a way to example how it could work in a Spotify use case.
Okay.
It was poorly thought out because it was one of those instances where it's kind of like, okay, here's a potential solution without fully understanding what the problem was.
Right.
And then B, Spotify or any other service would never let something like that interrupt the user experience.
No, right? Yeah, of course not.
Yeah. But what did happen was it allowed me to open up doors, and I started talking to stakeholders in the industry, and just started realizing what are the actual underlying challenges that need to be solved before you can try and build some sort of end product like this.
That was 2016, right?
Yeah, that was 2016. Yeah.
How long did you have to go and start talking to industry people to at least get them on board in principle? Because to me, that's like the trick to the adoption, right? You have a great idea, and for any industry, not just blockchain, you need a...
That's just core business principles, yeah.
Right. So how did you go about finding the people? Did you really like go down a certain path? Were you looking for people, or did you have an idea and you were talking to people that you thought were smart that would be interested in it?
Well, it started with looking at, okay, who are the local publishers I could get into contact with in Australia? Who's the local performing rights organizations? And start to talk to people within that organization. At the time, I think I was just like blindly reaching out to people through LinkedIn and saying, hey, I'm working on this. I want to get some feedback on what I'm working on. That was the beginning of it. And you were doing all of that in Australia, not even in the US. Yeah, and I was still working at that time as well. Still working in my other job or previous job. Right. They were actually the CEO at Datalicious was very supportive of it. It got to a point where I wanted to move on to this. I said, I think it has legs. Like, I feel like I've validated it enough that there's something here. Mm-hmm. And given that he, founded Datalicious as a startup, and I came in, and by the time I left, it had been going for nearly 10 years. So he'd been through that before. So we worked out an arrangement where I would sort of fade out, start working 4 days a week and then 3 days a week, and eventually leave the business to allow me to gradually ramp up to working full-time on Paperchain. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, that was the start of it all, really. And around that time, I reconnected with Dave. I was back in Australia, but I sent him an email at the end of 2016 and said, hey, this is what I'm working on. He had been going on his own little blockchain exploration as well, and started buying up Bitcoin and Ethereum, and he just thought, he thought the time was right that we needed to start revisiting some of the things we spoke about back in 2012. Wow. So that was maybe 4+ years later. Yeah. And in 2012, were you considering Bitcoin and Ethereum, or Ethereum didn't exist until 2014, right? So you couldn't. No, and I don't think I'm. At the time, I knew Bitcoin. I'd read about it as something that happened either on the Silk Road, or I knew people within Reddit were talking about it. But to me, it was always just a fringe currency. I didn't really get the bigger picture. I didn't really dive into it, and it wasn't until 2015 and reading about Ethereum that certain things just started to click and say, okay, this technology is a little bit more interesting. I was. Have you ever seen? I guess the person that really thought up Ethereum. Have you ever heard him speak? Yes, only through video, not in person, of course. No. Yeah. He's got a very funky way of speaking. It just struck me that there was someone when I was listening to him talk, all I could think of was this guy got really into the world at a very young age and was like just absorbed a ton of information and was able to come out with a really interesting creation that is running. I think it's still the case. You let me know if it's different, but the vast majority of blockchain startups are in some way circling around Ethereum. Yeah, I think that's still the case. The ERC20 token is like, I mean, what other tokens are there that are different? There's the one with the there's the ERC 721s and the non-fungible aspects. But it's still around Ethereum. It's Ethereum, right? Yeah, that's the main player. No, I think the same thing about Vitalik. Obviously, and I'm not sure where it came from, but an amazing ability to absorb a lot of information, not just technically, but also economically as well, and how to link those two together.
Because he was a writer for, I think, Bitcoin Magazine. That was how he started.
And he was only, what, 21, 22?
He seemed younger than that, but that's I couldn't really tell how old he was at the time. He's very young. I mean, he's still in his 20s, right?
Mid-20s at least, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, think about that. That's crazy.
Yeah, to build an amazing engine like that. I don't know. It's just, and I think they went about it the right way in that here's a foundation for you to build some application on, or some other technical protocol level on. I mean, it's just even what it's enabled already. It's a very powerful piece of technology.
Yeah, it really is. Do you even could Bitcoin is Bitcoin functionally able to really have the smart contracts applications that Ethereum has, or is it just too big?
I know people have tried to use it in that way. I don't think they've been that successful. People have forked it and tried to implement smart contract application within it, but
but that hasn't worked.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think it's for now they seem to operate different use cases and how each network gets used, and I think for the most part people are happy or can accept that.
Yes, I would agree. I would definitely agree with that.
I find I'm not, I know there's a lot of talk between the different, Bitcoin maximalist or Ethereum maximalist or however. I have no interest in being a part of that.
Yeah, I don't get that. I see those conversations on Twitter, and I hear people reference the Ripple army and all that, and I just whatever. That's way too in the weeds for me.
Yeah, and I've even found, there was a period 2017 very much, or maybe even early 2018 as well, very much in the mindset of everything crypto, and crypto comes before everything else. And that's obviously a dangerous mentality to have for a business, because what you're not doing is not building for a problem. You're not better understanding the problem. You're not building something that solves that problem. So that's something, it took us a while to get around to that. So it's like a common startup mistake was just not understanding the problem and not talking to customers. And that changed. And we made a shift like towards the end of last year. And since then, we've just been on a completely different trajectory.
So tell me about the shift that you made last year and what kind of caused it.
Well, one of them is 2017, we're still dealing with, say, metadata, black box royalties, attribution, copyright ownership, and things like that.
When you say you're talking about Paperchain.
Yes,
right?
Yeah. So working in that space, and there wasn't really a clear business model to be built around that. Mm-hmm. So what we ended up building, and so at the end of 2016, we also had Raul Romalo, who's our CTO, also join as a co-founder. He was actually in Valencia at the time. I was still in Australia. He wanted to do something around metadata and black box royalties. He read about what I was doing through my blog, I think, emailed me and said, hey, I'm a data architect. I really like what you're doing. And then we started talking, and we've worked together ever since.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't meet in person for about 8 months, I think.
Wow. That's it's very decentralized.
It's the modern startup story, I guess.
Yeah, all you need is a blog and a dream, right? You have to have a good idea. It has to make sense, and then you have to put it out there, which is how all of the protocols started that way. And there were many different people working on creating Bitcoin.
Yeah,
and I'm sure it's the same for Ethereum. I haven't heard the stories or really looked into it, but you can't build something like that without having a bunch of people that are just giving their time.
No, exactly. And I mean, for me, it was also a little bit of marketing. Once you have that blog, it's how do I get it in front of people who are going to be interested in this? So reaching out. And I think it got picked up by a couple of industry magazines in the music industry as well, which helped. So that generated a lot of interest. And that also helped me validate that there was something there, because of that, I had people coming to the website and signing up for the mailing list and things like that.
So in your entrepreneurship, you didn't just create you didn't just discover or figure out how you can kind of help monetize, work with data, and deal with payments to musicians, but you also did your own marketing, like just to get it off the ground.
Yeah.
How'd you do it? Like, how'd you go about trying to figure how to do that?
I think it was just like, okay, where are people reading about this? Whether it's somewhere on LinkedIn, whether it's somewhere on Reddit, or which industry magazines there are, which social media accounts are, and just pinging people and saying, hey, I'm working on this. I'd love to get some feedback on it. Or reaching out to a trade industry magazine and saying, this is what I'm working on. I saw you did an article about this. Maybe this is of interest to you. I think timing-wise was perfect as well. Obviously, at that time, it was really starting to become this really big interest in blockchain and how it applies to music and media. So a lot of publications were looking for new startups to cover and new solutions solving similar problems or different problems in the space. So I think timing-wise got very lucky there as well, where people just were interested and wanted to talk and say, well, you know, we all know this is a problem. How is this technology going to solve it?
So now let's talk about music and media. We've touched upon it a little bit, but how does blockchain itself come and connect with music and media?
It intersects at a number of places, and some it makes sense, and some it doesn't make a lot of sense. I spoke before about the whole validation piece and how you're capturing either contract terms, similar to what you have with, say, like a Rocket Law, or even just a typical contract. So the ability to digitize a publishing contract or a recording contract, and then having that as a machine-readable contract that you can push either funds through or you can read terms from that. That was one of the initial use cases that people were exploring. It's like, okay, you have all these contracts for recording artists that sit in a box somewhere in paper. And the challenge is that, okay, you get money in, and now you have to reference this offline piece of paper that says this is how much they should get paid based on the contract terms, or it sits in a spreadsheet somewhere. So how do you integrate payments with the contract? So you send money to a smart contract, and it knows the terms of the recording artist contract, and it can immediately just split the funds based on what the recording terms are.
All right, so let's step back a little further. Let's talk about the music industry in general and all of the asymmetry that you saw there. Did you ever read the book by Donald Passman called like Entertainment Law or something like that?
No, I haven't.
A lot of people have read it, and my brother was in the music industry for a while, and so I bought the book and tried to figure things out. And I got to tell you, it's a very well-written, easily digestible book, and I found it really, really difficult to follow. Because what I saw was, I'm an artist, I have a song. Everywhere along the line, there's somebody taking a piece out of whatever income that artist is making. It's like the Billy Joel song line and The Entertainer. What is that? I rub my neck and I write them a check and they go their merry way.
Right.
I mean, that's the epitome of it, right? So maybe you can kind of go through what you saw in the music industry and how there was all this disconnect or lack of information.
But you also have, different types of royalties as well, depending on whether you're a recording artist or whether you're a songwriter. And that's another level of complexity too. So in one side, you have what they call master royalties, which relates to the recording artist and the record label. So you may be Billy Joel, who records the song and is a recording artist, and he may have his label. I can't remember what his label was. Maybe it's Columbia or something like that.
I think it might have been Columbia, but who knows?
And so in terms of a particular type of revenue, they get paid that revenue stream for the master side of the business. Then on the other side, you may have...
What's the master side of the business?
The masters is the recording side. So
okay.
You have two types of copyright with any given song. You have the recording and you have the publishing. The recording is the actual sound recording. So usually whoever pays for it owns that, which is traditionally the record label.
Right.
So the actual recording of that song, they own the recording. But that song, it obviously is a recording of a composition. And that's a separate royalty in and of itself, because one song may have 10 different songwriters.
Okay, right. I did know that. Elton John and Bernie Taupin, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or even, today when you think about a lot of modern writers and the way, a lot of modern songs are constructed, there's 10 or 15 or 20 different songwriters for a given song. And so...
Oh, right. You mean currently, right?
Currently, yes.
Because everyone is sampling and all that?
Yeah, you're sampling from unknown sources, or you're, or known sources in some cases, or you're licensing from other artists and things like that. Someone maybe come in to just simply rework a particular beat or a particular type, but that gets them a songwriting credit.
And those guys aren't listed as the songwriters, right?
For the most part, they will be, if they can be. So that's the challenge, is that not all of them get attributed correctly.
Okay.
And so when it comes time to, so now you stream a song on, say, Spotify, and so there's a direct revenue stream to be paid on the master side, but then there's also a royalty to be paid on the publishing side as well. And so now you have, out of your, couple of cents from your stream, that has to be distributed between 10 different parties at various different percentages too. Each of them have their own split for which they're entitled to that royalty. And so the challenge
There's
is
a lot of hands in that pie, man.
Well, you have not only just all of those artists or songwriters who are taking that, but then you have publishers, or you have distributors or services in between who are managing that money too. And so there's a little bit taken out along the way. And so for a number of years, the big drive in the music industry was to create a central database for all of this data. So because you have so many different performing rights societies, and you have different publishers all around the world who all have their own data of songwriter information and splits and things like that. But none of them match with each other. They all conflict in some way. And so the goal was always to build a centralized database, or what they called the Global Repertoire Database, which was a single centralized service that had all repertoire information for around the world.
They were talking about that for years.
Yeah, this is going back like 7-9 years ago now.
Yeah, and it never happened, right?
No, because they couldn't agree on who would administer it, who would fund it, things like that.
Right.
And that still exists today. And so one of the challenges still is everyone. So I think in 2017, ASCAP, which is one of the American Performing Rights Societies, SACEM, which is one of the French societies, and I think it was PRS, which is the UK society, they did a joint initiative to essentially just migrate their databases together, or join their databases to see, because they all claim to have the most accurate information.
Sure, why wouldn't they, right?
Yeah, and they did it, and they conflicted on multiple entries.
So that's not a...
So they all have accurate information, but none of them, no two accurate information is the same. Yeah.
So now, enter blockchain, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the initial use case, or the initial thought that everyone went to was like, well, how can you build a central database that is almost like self-governs, but has everyone just pulls from the same source? And I think it's a logical use case, but again, the practical realities of trying to implement it politically and business-wise, it's very difficult. There's a lot of interest as to why they would not want it to change. Certain interests in the industry who want to maintain a level of opaqueness to the data. Because what happens is,
that's where they make their money.
Well, if these royalties go unpaid, they go into what they call black box royalties. So they sit in escrow accounts. Usually what happens is after 3 or 5 or 7 years, it gets distributed based on market share. And so,
what does that mean based on market share of the record labels?
Depending on the royalty type, either by the label, but typically this is in publishing, so the publishers. So there's only like 2 or 3 main publishers who dominate maybe like 80% of the market. So by this money simply going into these black box royalty pools, they can wait 3 years and just get 80% of that distribution and they don't have to do anything about it.
That sounds nice.
It's not a bad gig, right?
It's like the Bank of Williamsburg. Remember that?
No.
I don't know the story. So there's the Williamsburg Tower, or the Williamsburg Bank Tower in Brooklyn. You could see it when you're coming in from...
Is that the domed building?
Really tall domed, right?
Yeah,
now it was converted to condos. So that was created or built from all of the money that was left over by people who died and had accounts and never collected.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and no one in their estate ever came up. And it was a giant building. You can see it now. You could see it then. And it's all from, I think that's called Eschiat or Eschiat.
Right.
It's a weird name. But anyway, so it doesn't surprise me that these guys want to hold on to it, right?
And so the whole idea around why people pushing, or technologists pushed to blockchain, was the movement was around transparency. But again, you have industry forces who want to push back against that type of transparency. Did you encounter that? Or did you just figure it's there and you didn't even bother with it and moved over to... No, we definitely encountered it. The initial product we built was we took all of this, royalties sitting in black box royalties pools and tried to attribute them back to the owners. So you could bring your catalog, dump it in, and we'd match it to maybe you have something in a pool somewhere. The challenge was to actually try and get like accurate data. To do that, you have to go to publishers or industry players and say, we need your catalog information so we can better match who owns these unpaid royalties. And yes, they just wouldn't.
They didn't want to do that, huh?
Yeah, talking to some of the major publishers, and they say, internally we have an excellent database and everything is matched, but we're not going to give that data to anyone.
Right, and they don't need to because it's proprietary, right?
No, exactly, yeah.
So how do you guys, so you focus on media, and really it's primarily streaming media, right?
Yes.
Netflix, Spotify. Is it Pandora also? Do they do streaming media?
It's a different type. And what we found was everyone we were talking to, we kept like banging our head against the wall in terms of not having access to the data, but then also everyone we were talking to were like, well, look, we just need to get paid faster. So yes, it's a challenge to get paid, but it's just in general, when we do get paid, it takes a long time for that to happen. So you think about, you stream a song and it can take 6 months for that revenue to get paid out to an artist. It takes about 3 months to get to the label, and so while the industry and the rate of consumption has increased dramatically, the revenue and payments process hasn't changed. And so this is when we started revisiting what Dave and I were talking about in 2012. It's like, okay, this challenge still exists for these industries. So it's like, so what can we do about it now, and what's different? And what was different is now you have the API access has proliferated to all of this daily data. So we can go to Spotify, or we can go to Apple, and we can get stream data for a particular customer or a record label every 24 hours. We can see how many streams they generated yesterday.
That's publicly available information?
No, contractual through the label.
Oh, so the label gives you the ability to look at it, and I guess that the platforms that do the streaming, they kind of have to give it to them, right?
Well, it's just part of their distribution agreements. It's like, if we're going to put our catalog on there and you're going to monetize it, then we need that data back so we can build insights into our own marketing. It's like, how do we know who's listening or how many people are listening? And so for the labels we work with, they just simply give us the API keys for, say, Spotify, and we can just start pulling in that data. But that didn't really exist. Like, for now, it's sort of taken for granted, but
when you say API, can you explain what that is?
I mean, in the most simple terms, it's a data push of information, really. It's just a connection point where we can connect our database to, say, Spotify's, where they keep all of their analytics data, and we can pull analytics data for a given record label. Right, so like how many streams they generated, where they generated those streams, which territories, which artists, which songs, that sort of thing.
Now, I hear people talk about APIs all the time. The question I have is it hard to program to get the information from an API, or is it really just basic, simple stuff?
It's really basic, simple stuff. All the only difference is, like, there may be different data formats that it comes in, or different naming conventions. So depending on how you're using it or how you want to store it, you have to transform that data into, similar to like a spreadsheet. If you have a spreadsheet with different titles at the top, in the top column, but you're using a different convention for how you say first name versus last name, you just have to simply make sure that the data matches whatever you're trying to store it in.
Okay. When did APIs start becoming so available? Was it like 4 years ago, or was it longer?
No, I think even longer.
Was it primarily through cell phones? That's what it seemed like.
I think
for apps.
I think it became such a valid or viable business model to expose them and to utilize that data that there was a need for it. And I mean, we're talking, even in the 90s or even early 2000s.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so the businesses around even Facebook, when that was being developed and launched, a lot of the opportunity came around how easily can you expose information to other parties.
You want some water?
No, I'm okay.
Okay. So that goes back to the 90s.
I believe so. But I'm not a computer programmer, so
right.
I can only assume, because I know the sort of businesses that were operating and how they were sort of monetizing their data. An API would make sense to move that information or expose it to other parties. And that was a need that existed in the 90s or even earlier. But in terms of the actual usage, I mean, I would have to say late 90s, early 2000s.
It's amazing because I never really heard it much. I feel like in the last half decade, 5 years or so, people have become a lot more aware of data.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because of the whole Facebook issue with, I forget what that company was.
Yeah, the British one.
Yeah, and then also Obama, I think, in his campaign started using it, so people started to become aware of Facebook data that was kind of published then.
Yeah.
But everyone seems to understand APIs, or that an API is something that allows you to get information from someone that you have an account with.
Yeah.
And that's new. At least it seems new, being in the zeitgeist.
Yeah, definitely. Being part of being part of the lexicon, absolutely. And even if you talk to people who don't understand what an API is or how it's actually built, they understand the concept that an API can enable me to do certain actions.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like it's always the guidepost. This is terrible, but I feel like my parents know what it is. Wow.
That's impressive. I don't think my parents do.
I bet they do. I bet it comes up. If you read articles in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, it seems to pop up. Right.
And that's interesting because journalists are becoming much more tech savvy as well.
Yeah. I mean, Twitter apparently is really it's driven by journalists.
Yeah.
And I don't say that journalists are behind the scenes. I mean, the very popular accounts, it's really become a news source. So the most popular people, some of the people with I think the largest group of individuals that have accounts on Twitter are journalists. And the news pushes people to use the platform. So it wouldn't surprise me.
There's definitely a symbiotic relationship there.
Evil Twitter. Twitter's evil.
I mean, when I used to have a Twitter account, that's where I would go to get my news from. If there was anything breaking news, I would never go to a news site. I'd go to Twitter because I felt the information would be fresh, and not only would there be journalists on there, but also if there was an incident on the street in New York, I'm probably going to get better information from people who witnessed it because they'll probably post it on Twitter, so I'll probably get information from there.
Plus, Twitter has real-life crazy people tweeting.
Yeah, that helps too. So you get different flavors of the news for sure.
I saw, remember the shooting on, I think it was a 7 train like 3 months ago? It was recent. So, some guys got in a scuffle, and someone pulls out a gun and takes 7 shots. You can hear them being shot. Everyone's running and screaming. I saw that on Twitter. I found out about it on Twitter from someone in the crypto community that posted it. Not even from
from a news source.
From a news source.
Yeah, it just breaks faster. That's for sure.
It certainly does. You got off Twitter?
Yeah.
Well, that's terrible. How could you do that? You're in the crypto tech world.
Yeah, I feel happier now.
They say that.
That was probably at the end of the year, end of last year. Yeah, I just thought it was just it was encouraging. The worst impulses where you're very reactive to things and spend a lot of your days you get addicted to that stream of information, and so you're in that position where you're constantly just waiting for new information to come up and refreshing the feed, and then when it does come up, you have these worst impulses to respond to or engage with something.
Yeah, I try very hard to not engage on Twitter because it just doesn't matter.
Yeah, of course.
But it does. It does. It can get your blood pressure to rise.
Yeah.
I've never really liked being consumed by tech.
Yeah.
Let's say it that way. I found it to be somewhat alienating, and I'm not really a Luddite, but I do enjoy on the weekends. I don't pick up my phone. From Friday night to Saturday night, I don't pick it up. I just want to kind of be with my family.
No, that's perfect.
And I've always taken that time to just not be in front of a computer, not be in front of a television. So I've always felt that it's a weird kind of thing, being stuck to the news, being stuck to something, and not being able to just be with yourself. So I'm completely with you, and I've never been addicted to Twitter for that reason. But when I see some stuff that bothers me, it took me some training to be like, all right, this is bothering you. You just need to put it down and do something else. You're right. It really can drive you wild.
And I think even for where I've spent most of my time this year, whether it's around fundraising or just basic business building, I definitely feel out of the loop for whatever happens in the crypto world and things around pricing, or we mentioned before the maximalist debates and things like that.
Right.
I go to events and people ask me if I heard about this blockchain or this coin or this whatever, and most of the time I haven't. And I don't know how people have the time to read up and follow it that closely, but
I don't know either. I find it amazing. You know, there's all these meetings and this. I'm always like, guys, I have to work.
yeah,
I would love to go to your meeting, but I actually have to work.
yeah.
And I don't know. And there are some people that seem to be everywhere, and they must not be sleeping, or that's their job.
I believe that if they're day traders, especially, they're pretty in on what's happening and who's moving where. It's a fascinating subculture.
It really is.
Yeah.
I can't keep up with it. I really can't.
Yeah, and I found it far too distracting for what I was trying to do. And it's always that push and pull. It's like, okay, now I'm fundraising, so I'm focusing on that. What I'm not doing is building the business. If I'm building the business, then I'm not really focusing on fundraising. So you kind of have that balance.
Right, it's true. And I think what also gave me more balance is doing this, because I had to use a little bit of social media, but then I also had all of my spare time, and I didn't think I had much, but I have enough to do this, which is a lot more than I thought I had. But because of that, you have to be really regimented with your time, so that you make sure that, all right, I'm doing this now, and now I have to stop and do something else.
Yeah, yeah.
And you can't do both. You can't podcast and then do something at the same time. It's not possible. You're having a conversation with someone. So I see. I agree with you.
And you were probably, you probably knew it from the first one, but there is a really good art to being a good interviewer.
Yes.
And you think about the really great ones, whether it's someone like, a Michael Parkinson, or even like, say, even a David Letterman can be very good.
Yeah, he could be.
There's a huge difference between them and, say, a Jimmy Fallon.
Or Joe Rogan.
Or Joe Rogan.
Who is the most powerful interviewer on the planet. He does I think he gets 1 billion listens a year, or something like that. I mean, no one could even approach that if it wasn't for podcasting and these little phones.
Yeah, yeah. And what's interesting is that, Spotify just made a couple of investments into that and acquisitions into podcasting.
It's the newest big market now.
Yeah, and for them, what it means also is that content for Spotify, and they don't have to pay a thing for it.
Yeah, that's right.
So
that's right.
They don't have to pay royalties to labels or to artists. They don't have to deal with any of that. It's just simply a way for them to gain market share. So
it's true. And then the podcasters want it so they can get ad revenue.
Yeah. And again, Spotify doesn't have anything to do with that. So.
No, it's a great thing. I was actually surprised when I saw that Spotify had podcasts. I was like, podcasts? You're Spotify. I go to because I want to listen to whatever I want to listen to. My kids have some ridiculous new person that they want to listen to, like JoJo Siwa. Do you know who that is?
No.
It's like the 16-year-old kid who sings, who redoes songs. But it's great because it's great for kids. There's no cursing in it. Your kids can listen to rap and there's not going to be cursing. She doesn't rap, but just an example. So that's what I thought. That's how I find my kids will, say a song name into the phone or whatever, and then it'll come out, and it's great. I don't have to spend money buying albums for them.
That's definitely. I mean, for someone who once owned maybe about 4,000 CDs or something like that. So
really, 4,000.
Yeah.
Damn.
I think this is probably when I was from the age I was like maybe 18 to like 23 or something like that. I can't, thousands and thousands of dollars spent buying CDs.
CDs, not records, huh? You're too young for records.
I was too young for records.
Yeah. Yeah, records were great. They were a lot of fun. But CDs are easy, man. You can just load them up and play them.
Yeah, but then
can't put 5 records in your car.
Yeah, it's the same thing though. It's that when you move places, that's just stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
And it becomes too much stuff.
Yeah, man. I mean, right now I have all of my old CDs, and I don't need them anymore, and I can't believe I don't need them because of Spotify, essentially.
Right.
And I want to use my phone not for music, but but for pictures, right? Because that's what everyone uses their phone for now. They're walking their photo albums in your pocket.
Yes, yeah.
So it's kind of interesting how the world changed.
Yeah, and I think, we were talking before about APIs and how they become part of the lexicon, but again, new technology enables new use cases or new demands for use cases. And so now we walk around with a record player in our pocket, or with a camera in our pocket, or a photo album in our pocket, or even, we can run our own day trading or an exchange.
Yes.
On the markets, just from our pocket.
That guy from Canada, didn't he run an entire exchange? The one who died, Quadra, I think it's called.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't he run it just from his house on his laptop?
Yeah.
He took it with him to India. He took the whole damn exchange with him to India on his laptop. It's crazy.
It's a mobile world.
It really is. Yeah. All right, so we've gone a little bit afield. So now we spoke about some of the challenges and attribution issues that you've got, which seem fairly substantial. How about payments? What are you guys doing with the payments?
Well,
or how do they work in the music industry in general?
Again, it just becomes a timing issue. So you have this where there's hyper consumption now. There's, hundreds of millions of streams occurring every single day, and there's fractional payments that are being aggregated at a monthly level. But the pace at which that gets down the supply chain, it can, like I said, it can be up to 6 months for that to happen. And so that impacts artists or labels or businesses in that supply chain. It impacts their ability to how they're investing and how they're growing their businesses and what opportunities available to them. I mean, I just got back from a conference in Cannes and, talking to an artist manager there, and they said there's always opportunity, especially if you're an artist just about to break or you're currently breaking. There's always opportunity, whether it's a tour or it's some sort of sync deal or some promotional campaign. But
what's a sync deal?
When you're doing some sort of sync promotion with, like for a commercial or something like that, with a brand, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
It usually requires some sort of investment to either be on location or something like that, and the money's not always there. And that's just traditional business management. It's just like Spotify has to have operational capital. It needs to take in its subscription revenue. It needs to take in its ad revenue. It needs to obviously pay its staff, pay for its operational expenses, and then it needs to distribute to, say, a distributor. That distributor has the same challenges in that they need to take that money in. They have their own operational expenses that they hold on to for 30 or 60 days or however long the accounts receivable or payable that they hold that for, and then they pay that to the label. Similar situation, a label holds that until they need to pay that to the artist.
So tell me this, how fast do you think people will be able to start getting payments now that there's all this data that's out there?
Well, in our model at least, we could pay it as quickly as 15 minutes after we receive the stream data. So if we can get that data from Spotify and see that you've generated X number of streams, which is worth X number of or Y number of dollars, we can advance that payment to you once we have that data as collateral.
And you get that data on a daily basis, right?
For now, it's every 24 hours, yeah.
Wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, the other model that's being explored is like micro payments. So as soon as a stream occurs, you get that fraction of a penny straight into your account. The challenge is that it doesn't work in the current system, so you have to build a new Spotify.
Oh, the entire layering of Spotify doesn't let you do that.
No, it's just simply because that's not the way their model works. And it's also, how do you inject yourself earlier into the payment system? I'm not sure how that could work. So you just effectively have to build a new Spotify. And
I would imagine that the way Spotify works is you pay your $15 or $10 or $20 a month as a user, and then they take it and it's on a monthly basis. Do you pay in arrears for Spotify, or do you pay like forward? In other words, I pay today, and that's good. I'm good from
you pay forward
mid-June to mid-July.
Yeah, and then if your payment bounces next month, then they'll cut off that month's access.
Okay, so there's really no risk. It's not like you're paying in arrears. You're paying for the time. You're paying in advance.
Yeah.
So I guess the money is there for Spotify to give to artists, although administration costs are probably somewhat prohibitive, so they don't want to bother with that, and they built it.
Yeah, and we even find at the label level they want to pay artists faster, but for them to do that, they have to start accounting faster and running their end-run royalty processes faster, and it becomes cost prohibitive for them to do that. So we've spoken with labels who have been, they pay their artists every 6 months, and they tried to move to quarterly, or they went from quarterly to monthly, and it just became too much of a burden on them because they just don't have the infrastructure to manage that.
So what are you guys, I know that you're rolling out your business and you've got a number of accounts and you're doing things, but what are you seeing that's the most attractive thing? Is it artists pushing the labels? Are the labels pushing the artists? Like, where's the push coming from? Is it from a couple of places, one place? Maybe these are dumb questions, so tell me.
No. And we see it coming from both of them, actually. The artists are good because they lean back on their labels and say, hey, here's a better way that we could do this. It's also coupled with the way the industry is changing, where artists are starting to have more control over deal terms and things like that. It used to be that...
Really?
Well, it used to be a record label would take 80% of the revenues, 20% to the artists, and the record label would control, they would own the master rights to the recordings and things like that. That's all changing now.
Like artists, the Beatles, like Paul McCartney when he lost the rights of all the music to Michael Jackson.
No, exactly. So artists are now starting to own and maintain ownership of all of the master rights. So they get all of their recordings they take with them if they were to leave the label. So they have that.
How did they manage to work that?
It's just the way the industry is changing, the way the economics are changing. Now artists have more. They have more options. They have optionality to say, okay, I don't need to go through you anymore. I can go directly to Spotify if I want to.
So it's the ability to live stream. It's the platforms.
The technology has enabled new methods of distribution where you could be an artist who doesn't need a record label anymore. You have one of the biggest artists in the U.S. at the moment, or the last couple of years, Chance the Rapper, who is an unsigned artist, doesn't have a record label, and he makes tens of millions of dollars a year.
That is cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a TV show without a network, right?
Yeah.
I mean, people can turn
You're doing
it
it right now. Yeah.
So I guess you're right. That's amazing. So I didn't realize that it changed that much. That I've heard of Chance the Rapper, but I don't know what he or she sings. He?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I didn't want to offend anyone. All right. So, but I've heard of his name, but I assumed that he was like, Jay-Z was 20 years ago, or however long he's been doing it, where there was a label behind it. Isn't that Jay-Z has his own label, right? Was it Black something Records?
Rock Nation, I think he was on.
Oh, I'm thinking of his song. Well, he had the Black album.
Yeah,
So,
and then the Blueprint as well. Yeah, but he had the Black album. Yeah.
All right, and then there's also was Death Row Records.
Yeah, that wasn't Jay-Z.
Who was Death Row?
I2 was on Death. That was Dr. Dre.
Dr. Dre.
That was Death Row. I don't know if Ice-T was on there. Yeah.
Okay.
But again, like even with someone like Dr. Dre, I mean, he's still signed to a major, but he has enough clout where he doesn't need to have a label. If he
but
wants to.
It took him a ton of time and work to be able to do that, right? That was where the money was when that was what all of the entrepreneurial rappers were doing, right?
Yeah.
They would and other artists too, but it seemed like it was happening more in the rap music community than it was in the rock band community, probably because there's one rapper versus 5 dudes that are drunk and high and being chased by groupies in a band in rock and roll bands, But the rap community seemed to adopt that model a lot faster, and I wonder if it was also a facet of time.
Yeah,
having their own labels.
And I think across so many facets of the industry, I think the innovation has come out of the rap and hip hop communities over the past 20 years. Simply because they have a unique way of composing music in terms of when they're sampling and things like that. So the way music was composed and the way they composed beats and things like that, it required new ways of effectively creating song ownership structures and things like that. It had to get created to suit how they were using the music and how they were creating music. And you think about, like, it's not only just the ability to... Damn, that's kind of
cool, Daniel.
It's to me, it's fascinating. And even like composition wise, I think you look at artists like Frank Ocean who sort of blur like R&B and soul and hip hop and rap, but then also rock as well. They seem less afraid of mixing these genres together. And so they're tapping into some really interesting parts of the zeitgeist now, where you have consumers who are less defined by genre. There's no longer like there's the heavy metal people or there's the rap people.
I remember the metalheads. Were there metalheads in Australia when you were growing up? Or was that already gone?
I was a metalhead.
You were metal? Did you have the long hair?
Yeah.
Did you headbang? Did you make it do the whole thing?
I played in a heavy metal band when I was a teenager.
You did?
Yeah.
What was your name?
Nuthead, I think.
Nuthead, that's cool.
Yeah. I think, Nuthead, yeah.
Nut, N-U-T or K-N-O-T?
N-U-T.
All right, I like it.
I'm not sure where it came from, but yeah.
Does it matter you were in high school?
No, it didn't matter. And so people aren't defined by their genre anymore. Now it's like you don't go to Spotify, you don't listen to the heavy metal one. You listen to chill or you listen to relax.
Oh, yeah, that's right. They have these different vibes. That's
so
right.
Now it's about mood, and within chill, you could listen to a rock song or a hip hop song or a or a pop
There's
song.
electronic chill, I think.
Yeah, and so you have artists now who are tapping into that, who are less afraid to do that. And then also on the technology side, it's easier than ever to record as well. So for say a Chance the Rapper who starts recording in his bedroom, just using his laptop, starts distributing through SoundCloud, builds up millions of fans through SoundCloud, and then eventually starts to do distribution deals where he puts it on Spotify and can actually start to monetize it properly.
That's how he started.
Yeah.
SoundCloud in his bedroom.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And that's all you need. It's just a laptop and some way to create beats, or you can buy a microphone similar to what you've got here, and you can put that in front of a guitar and record it, loop it back, sing over the top of it.
Yeah, you know what? That's true. Although I used to play guitar. I don't really say I play guitar anymore because I don't ever play guitar anymore. But that's right. It's a lot easier to record. When I was in high school, I went to a friend of mine who had a recording studio, and it was, I forget what it was, and you made a tape and you could do all these things with it. But now it's on your phone, right? It's on your iPad and laptop.
And the quality was excellent. I know when I first started studying sound engineering, and it would always be the argument that, oh, it'll never sound as good as the studios, working at a $500,000 Neve console or anything like that.
Yeah. Which
maybe is true, but at the end of the day, if the song's good, the song is good.
And when you stream it over earphones that don't have the plug-in, the actual sound quality that you get is diminished anyway.
Yeah. And so there's, within the music community and the music industry, there's a push for maybe old school people to have like high quality downloads and streaming and things like that. But again, if like you're sitting on the subway and you're listening through headphones, it's like
when I do all my listening right now anyway.
So you're not going to get any of that quality.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny. I was talking to someone that lives in my town, and he said that he started. He was in the music industry for a long time. He was did something with I think he was an A&R man or he managed a band, a famous band. Right. And he started selling records. I'm like, what do you mean you're selling records? He said, well, there's like a whole cadre of like 40-year-old guys and like they're all in their 40s, like their 30s or 40s, and they love records. Yeah. And so they go and they buy records, old records. Apparently new records are more expensive than old records.
You buy a new album or new LP and it's like $60.
Are you really? That's how much it costs? Why does it cost that much? Because there's not that many being made?
Yeah, I guess so.
That's nuts to me. So yeah, he said they go and they buy the old stereo systems that my dad that like we had growing up, like a Zenith, that you would use to tune.
It's a tube amplifier and it has,
Yeah, and some of them like refurbish them and then they just sit there and they listen to records, and I thought that was the strangest thing I had ever heard.
There's definitely a sound to it.
Yeah, I never liked the pops that you got in the records. It always annoyed me.
Yeah, some would say that's just part of it, the imperfections of it.
Yeah, as someone who was a musician for a while, and to this day, it agitates me when I hear it. I don't like it.
Yeah, and then there's so much about the pressing of the record and how that changes the sound. So it's interesting that to have musicians who have a preference for records when a digital recording is a much clearer artifact than
I think so.
A vinyl pressing.
Yeah, I agree with you completely on that. All right, so let's do this. So let's talk about blockchain startups or growing a blockchain business in 2019. Because you guys were you founded in 2017 formally?
Formally 2017, yeah.
Right, so you've been in the business for 2 years. You lived through the ICO boom and bust. You lived through, as a business, I think 2 cycles of up and down for Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is now at 8. It's not at 20 where it was in at the end of 2017, but still.
Yeah.
So what was it like? What's it like now? And looking back at when it was really frothy, how's it different?
I'm not sure, like, in terms of the wider industry and where we fit within that. I just know that, as we've been lucky enough to survive, and you get smarter, and so I think we're making smarter decisions, and that is showing that is putting us in a nice trajectory compared to where we were. So I think 2017 or in 2018. Again, spending too much time trying to build things without actually talking to customers, which, again, regardless of what industry you're in, it's just business basics. The other is also not starting to think of ourselves less as a blockchain company. When we used to pitch, we used to always lead with that. It was about blockchain, we're doing this with blockchain. And ultimately, customers don't care. Most people don't care.
Blockchain startup, those two initials are BS, right?
Yeah. It's the same as you don't go into a meeting and say, like, oh, we're an AWS startup, because you happen to build on Amazon Cloud.
Right, exactly.
It's just a tool that enables some function of your business. And so we actually, at the start of this year, we went through the Techstars blockchain accelerator program.
Which is a big deal. It's not easy to get into that, right?
Yeah, I think they have a 1 or 2% acceptance rate. That was actually our third time, I think, applying. We were initially applying for the music ones that runs out of LA, and then we eventually got into the blockchain one. And what I found fascinating about Techstars' approach was they did it this year, so they're 2 years behind the initial boom in a way.
Okay.
And so people felt it was weird timing for them to do one based around blockchain. It's like, did they miss the boat? And their approach was always just, let's just find businesses who are doing, building solid businesses that had good business fundamentals, and maybe blockchain just either makes something more efficient or enables some sort of product that wasn't available before. But beyond it, the core of it is still a solid and a stable business. And so we had 10 companies who, again, were excellent businesses, excellent founders, but none of us saw ourselves as blockchain companies. I mean, there were technologies that we used, but that wasn't what we were about. None of us had tokens. None of us were doing ICOs. We were more focused on, and Techstars' approach is always, again, just the fundamentals, which is talking to customers and getting customers.
Now, I recall I went to one of the Techstars kind of pitches that was done, and found that I did not hear the word blockchain at all.
Yeah.
So I didn't even know that was a blockchain-focused startup, which is, I think, the right way to do it, because it means you have a solid business and it's not hyped, right?
Yeah, yeah. And we even had that last week where you're pitching in Cannes at this music conference, and got a lot of comments that we were the least buzzwordy out of the companies pitching.
That's a huge compliment.
I didn't realize at the time, but that's good compliment to have too. Like,
yeah, I mean,
that's a really good compliment.
You have a solid business. So you were in Cannes for how long?
Oh, just under a week.
You didn't get a 10. What's going on? What's wrong? You were doing too much business.
I think I did okay. I spent a lot of time on the beach. I mean, ever since the weather turned good in New York, I've been in shorts and shirt. That's it.
Yeah, it's the nice thing about having your own company. You can do that, right?
Yeah. Actually, I ended up getting last minute tickets to a show last night, so I had to go out and buy some pants.
What kind of show was it? Was it like Broadway or like a musical show?
It was a concert gig out at Brooklyn Steel. It was Beach House, which is good.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's cool. All right, so let's wind up with our two wind-up questions. I'm going to ask you a third. First, I'm going to ask you, what is your favorite style of music?
That's difficult. I don't have one. Probably
top three.
Probably either ambient music or jazz.
I love jazz.
And then hip hop.
Hip hop, there you go. And I find ambient music is great for focusing.
Yeah.
But outside of that, it just puts me to sleep.
Well, I can't work to things with lyrics playing usually, so it has to be. So jazz is good for that, but sometimes jazz has a lot of dynamics in it, so ambient is nice to. Also, when I studied, I learned and did a couple of papers on Brian Eno and the birth of ambient music, and the compositional history around it is very fascinating.
Interesting. I didn't know anything about that. I'll have to look into it.
Yeah, I mean, it was a larger body of composers, but Brian, was considered the godfather of ambient music, and sort of where it came from was he was hit by a car in London, I think in 1973 or something like that, And as he was recovering in bed, a friend brought over a couple of records for him to listen to. And he, they put on the record player and then they left, but then it was so low that he could barely hear it, but he couldn't get up because of his broken hip. And this music was playing, but it was so faint, and it was like blending in with the outside traffic noise and things like that. So then he started thinking about how you could compose music that sit within a space.
That's kind of cool. Wow.
Yeah. And he, the first big one was music for airports, where he was in, I think it was an airport in Germany somewhere, and Frankfurt maybe. And he said it's a beautiful space, but they had just had this like elevator music playing. And so he started to wonder, like, what's it like to compose music designed to sit in an airport? You're just about to get on a plane and there's a lot of things going through your head. Maybe you think you're going to die. Maybe you have a lot of stress. It's like,
it's an airport, you could die. Right?
Yeah. Well, he's like, there's got to be better music than music,
Right. That's pretty cool. Ambient music. That's nice.
He's a fascinating guy. He composed the Windows 95 chime sound.
Really?
Yeah.
That's the ding.
Yeah, it's like a 3-second chime or something like that. He was going through like writer's block, and there was a call out for composers for it, and for him it was something different to get away from composing long ambient pieces. And so once he did it, he was like, now that I've written something for 3 seconds, like writing a song that's 3 minutes, I have all the time in the world. Writing something for 30 minutes again, so it just helped him reconfigure how he thought about time when he was writing pieces.
It's amazing how the brain works.
Yeah.
Stuck in a room and with a broken hip, and all of a sudden you invent ambient music because it's a record player that's just going back and forth, and then a 3-second song helps you compose a 30-minute song. So, all right, I would like to get what you think is, if you were to distill all of the lessons that you've had in growing your company from Australia to here, and you would distill them to one piece of advice that you would give to someone you really care about, you were mentoring, what would that advice be?
I think try to keep your relationships. I think.
Tell me the story behind that.
I mean, obviously moving countries and being away from family and things like that, having, a partner back in Australia as well, and, this sort of destroying that relationship as well. You have to find some way to make them work. And ultimately, there's going to be a lot of sacrifices, and hopefully you still have those relationships at the end. And hopefully the sacrifices were worth it in some way or another.
You need something to come home to, right?
Yeah.
Okay. That was deep, man.
Well, it's just like, to me, at least my experience, and, for people who didn't have this experience, I envy them, but it's like, this has been about me figuring out that there's the relationships that no longer exist because of the time you put into a startup. And then there's even relationships that don't even get a chance to exist because of the time you're putting into a startup. So I think if I could do it again, I'd approach all of that differently.
A lot of sacrifice, huh?
Seems to be.
Well, anything that's worth doing requires a ton of sacrifice, whether it's your time, like you said, or relationships or others. So,
yeah, and I think, if you have family and friends, it's like, call them and make sure you're in regular contact, because it does get lonely on the road, as they say.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest advice I can think of, and to me, that's critical to survival as well.
That's deep, man. We're ending on that note. That's just too profound to ask another question. All right. Well, Daniel Dewar, thank you for coming to the show. Really appreciate it. We'd love to have you again. And good luck on Paperchain. Keep killing it. Keep knocking them dead. Let us know what you're doing, okay?
Cheers, mate.
All right. Thanks a lot.